Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to call this meeting to order of the Public Safety and Transportation and Environment Subcommittee. First, I'd just like to start by acknowledging my colleagues as we do standard tradition in all other previous hearings. We will be joined by the veteran momentarily, George Edwards. We also have Senator Michael Jackson, and we also have Senator Johnny Ray Sailing with us today. Today we will be hearing from 5 respective public agencies and getting report outs, and we'd like to start off with Judiciary, and we'll bring up Budget Analyst Caleb Weiss to give the report. Mr. Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go ahead and start the budget presentation with the document here on the screen. As you can see, in fiscal 2023, the judiciary budget increases by $29.4 million, or 4.4%, to bring the total budget to $695.5 million. Before we get into the discussion of the measuring for results section, there are a couple key observations. One is that this budget includes the recommendations from the 2021 Judicial Compensation Commission. The second is that the Access to Counsel and Evictions program rollout begins in fiscal 2023. There's also an issue regarding the Racial Equity Impact Notes program, and then also an issue regarding the submission of the fiscal 2021 Court Performance Measures report. Moving ahead to exhibit number 1, which is the district and circuit court filing cases. As you can see here, since fiscal 2020, the district court cases have declined by 28.1%, while circuit court cases have decreased by 18.9%. Moving ahead to exhibit number 2, which is the case types for the district court. As you can see here in fiscal 2021, all case types, with the exception of domestic violence cases, decreased, while domestic violence cases increased slightly. Moving ahead to exhibit 3, which is the case types by percentage for the district court. As you can see here, traffic cases comprise the largest percentage at 33%, while landlord-tenant cases are 31%. The landlord-tenant cases are particularly important this year as we discuss the rollout of the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. Exhibit number 4 is the case types for the circuit court. As you can see here, for the circuit court, all case types decreased in fiscal 2021 over the prior year. For the appointed attorney program in exhibit number 5, as you can see here, Baltimore City comprises the largest percentage at 42%, while Prince George's County is the second largest at 21%. For exhibit number 6, which is bail reform and pretrial dispositions, as you can see here, the number of unsecured releases has decreased slightly in fiscal 2021, and the number of individuals assigned bail has also decreased. However, that decrease is part of a longer running trend that goes back to 2017. The number of individuals held without bail, however, has continued to increase along the same trend since 2017. Exhibit number 7 is the utilization of the judiciary's self-help programs. I'd like to note here that for the District Court Help Center and the Family Law Court Help Center, due to the impacts of COVID-19, both of those centers experienced restricted operations in fiscal 2020 and 2021, and you can see that reflected in the numbers. However, the Merlin Court Help Center has increased dramatically in fiscal 2021 because that help center was able to operate remotely during the COVID-19 pandemic. Moving ahead to a new performance measure included this year, which is the problem-solving courts. As you can see here, it tracks the number of individuals who entered the problem-solving courts, graduated, were administratively discharged, and were terminated from the program in fiscal 2021. As you can see, the number of individuals for the drug courts comprise the largest for the number entering, graduating, and being terminated from the program. However, for administrative discharge, mental health courts comprise the largest number. For exhibit number 9, this is the problem-solving courts, the total participants and expenditures. As you can see in fiscal 2021, the number of participants increased slightly. However, the expenditures did dip slightly over the prior year. Moving into the fiscal 2023 allowance, here we have an overview of agency spending. 72% of agency spending goes towards personnel. This is similar to prior years. However, grants comprise 9%, and then you can see the remaining percentages here in the sidebar. Exhibit 11 is the spending by program. Here you see that 68% of spending goes towards the trial courts, with 16% for administration and support, 12% for IT, and 4% for the appellate courts. Exhibit number 12 is the proposed budget change in 2023. I'd like to draw your attention to the personnel section here. The first is $18.4 million for the judicial compensation placeholder adjustments. These adjustments are in the place of their actual recommendations from the Judicial Compensation Commission, and I'll discuss that a little bit later. The second is a 3.5% merit increase for judiciary employees, and that's a $8.3 million increase. Then the new 34.75 new positions, new regular positions, is a $2.5 million increase. I'd also like to draw your attention to the circuit court clerk salary increase, which is tied to the Senate Bill 74, and that's a $1.3 million increase. I'll discuss that a little bit later in the analysis as well. One thing in the non-personnel, sorry for the scrolling, on the next page that I'd like to draw your attention to is the decrease for the one-time fiscal 2022 pretrial home detention spending, which shows up as a negative $5 million in the current allowance. For exhibit number 13, this covers new personnel spending. For the new personnel spending in fiscal 2023, the majority of it, 58% of it, is for the placeholder adjustments for the Judicial Compensation Commission, the judicial salary enhancements. The second largest percent, 26%, is for the 3.5% merit increase, followed by 8% for the new regular positions, 4% for the clerks of the court increase, and 4% is other personnel increases. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Judicial Compensation Commissions. There's a summary here of the work of the Judicial Compensation Commission. However, I'm not going to read that by thing. The fiscal 2023 Judiciary Allowance includes $18.4 million for new judiciary spending for judicial compensation. This would provide the judges roughly with a $35,000 salary increase. This was included as a placeholder. The implementation of the Judicial Compensation Commission recommendations only requires $5.9 million in new spending in fiscal 2023. As such, DLS recommends reducing $12.5 million in excess general funds that are not needed to fund the recommendations of the Judicial Compensation Commission. The second personnel I'd like to talk about is the Circuit Court clerk's salary increase. Here we have for Senate Bill 74 would increase the maximum annual salary for the clerks of the Circuit Court from $124,000 to $146,000. The fiscal note for this bill estimated the amount of expenditures at $719,000, but the fiscal 2023 budget allowance included $1.3 million in new spending for the bill. This would leave $619,000 in excess funding. DLS recommends adopting budget bill language, reducing the judiciary's budget by $619,000 to delete these excess funds. DLS also recommends restricting the remaining $719,000 in funds pending the passage of Senate Bill 74, House Bill 519. There's a discussion here of statewide salary increases. I won't read all of that, but it includes the amount that's budgeted in the DBM statewide account for judiciary salary increases in fiscal 2023, as well as some that were in fiscal 2022 as well. The personnel changes is the next item here, which is Fiscal 2023 allowance includes 34.75 new positions, new regular positions, and 7 new contractual positions. Here shows an allocation of those new regular positions by judiciary subdivision. As you can see, 29.5 of the new positions are for the district court, 4.3 for the administrative office of the courts, 1.5 for the Court of Special Appeals, 0.4 positions for the Thurgood Marshall State Law Library, 1 for Judicial Information Systems, and 5 for the Circuit Court Clerk's offices. There's also distribution of these positions. Oh, sorry. No, yeah, here it is. 17 of them are court clerk positions, 7 interpreter positions, 6 administrative positions, 2 are case manager positions for the problem-solving courts, and then there are 6 part-time positions that are being converted into full-time positions, which totals 2.75 new positions. Moving forward to the first issue, which is access to counsel and evictions funding. Chapter 746 of 2021 established a right to counsel in cases of eviction for qualifying individuals. It also established the Access to Counsel and Evictions Task Force, which is led by the Office of the Attorney General. This task force was tasked with studying potential funding recommendations, but also making recommendations to improve the implementation of the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. I will note that there's additional information regarding the first annual report for the Access to Counsel and Eviction Task Force in the Office of the Attorney General budget analysis. Chapter 746 also established the Access to Counsel and Evictions Special Fund, the fund which will be administered by the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. Maryland Legal Services Corporation is a nonprofit corporation that provides civil legal services for low-income Marylanders. The Maryland Legal Services Corporation traditionally receives funding from the Interest on Loyal Trust Accounts, IOLTA, surcharges for court filing fees, and a distribution from the Abandoned Property Fund. I will note that due to the impacts of COVID-19, 2 of Maryland Legal Services Corporation's traditional funding streams have been impacted. The Interest on Loyal Trust Accounts has been impacted by ongoing low interest rates, and the surcharges for court filing fees has been impacted by decreases in court filings during COVID-19. Chapter 806 of 2021 increased the distribution from the Abandoned Property Fund to $8 million beginning in fiscal 2022, and this has helped to compensate for some of the shortfall from MLSC's other traditional funding sources. Also, MLSC received funds from the Relief Act of 2021, and the administration provided MLSC with $8.6 million in fiscal 2021 from the Deutsche Bank settlement funds and discretionary consumer protection funds that were available from this settlement in response to the mortgage financial crisis in 2008. Exhibit 15 shows Maryland Legal Services Corporation's funding sources from fiscal 2019 through fiscal 2023, and you can see the different funding sources that I have identified. Moving forward to the Access to Counsel and Evictions funding, which is separate from Maryland Legal Services Corporation's traditional funding sources. Here in fiscal 2023, Maryland Legal Services Corporation estimates that it needs $11.8 million to implement Access to Counsel and Evictions program. DHCD, Department of Housing and Community Development, has included $5.4 million. The administration has included $5.4 million in DHCD's budget in funding for this program. However, the remaining balance of $6.4 million is still needed in order to reach the total that MLSC has identified. Fiscal 2024, that number is projected to increase to $21 million. And in 2025, the number is expected to reach peak implementation, full implementation at $30 million for Access to Counsel and Evictions. Exhibit number 17 shows the Access to Counsel and Evictions funding by category. 93% of funding for the program will go for funding legal services, 6% towards outreach and education, and 1% towards administrative expenses. DLS recommends adopting committee narrative, requesting MLSC to submit quarterly reports on the status of the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. DLS also recommends adding $6.4 million in general funds to the Judiciary Appropriation for MLSC to fully fund the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. Moving ahead to the second issue, which is the availability of data for the Racial Equity Impact Notes program. The Schaefer Center for Public Policy at the University of Baltimore released a report on this topic, detailing some recommendations. The report states that major point at which data is lacking with respect to race and the criminal justice system in Maryland is the judiciary. The Schaefer Center report recommends that when a case is entered into the Maryland Electronic Court System, MDEC, demographic information on the defendant, including race and ethnicity, should be included. With regards to that, sorry for the scrolling here, we ask that the judiciary should comment on the steps that are being taken to verify and track demographic data for defendants in the courts necessary to implement the Racial Equity Impact Notes program. The third and final issue here is the submission of the 2021 Court Performance Measures Report. The 2021 JCR asked that the judiciary submit an annual report on court performance measures, and here it details what those performance measures are. This data is essential to understanding if all Marylanders have access to justice within a reasonable time frame and evaluates the impact of the pandemic on court operations. However, due to the administrative orders issued by the Chief Judge of the court, the case processing standards were suspended for trial court. Judiciary indicates that this suspension of case processing standards, that there is no way to measure, again, there is no standard of which to measure the trial court's performance in fiscal 2020. This was submitted in a letter that was submitted in lieu of the reports. DLS recommends the adoption of budget bill language restricting $500,000 in general funds pending the submission of next year's report, the fiscal 2022 annual court performance measures report. Next, I'm going to move ahead to the annual recommendations. A few of them have already been talked about, but there's also some annual ones as well. The first is to reduce the funds for the excess funds for the Judicial Compensation Commission, judicial salary enhancements. Item number 2 is an annual piece of narrative that requests a report on the appointed attorney program costs and utilization. Item number 3 is an annual piece of narrative that requests a report on judgeship needs in fiscal 2024. Item number 4 is an annual piece of language that restricts its $8.25 million for the implementation of DeWolf v. Richmond, which provides for required representation at initial appearances before district court commissioners. Item number 5 is the restricts funds pending the submission of the annual court performance measures report that I talked about earlier. Item number 6 is the addition of funds for Maryland Legal Services Corporation, the $6.4 million. Item number 7 is the quarterly reports for Access to Counsel and Evictions for Maryland Legal Services Corporation. Item number 8, is the elimination of excess funds for the circuit court clerk salary increases. Item number 9 makes the remaining funds contingent upon the passage of Senate Bill 74, House Bill 519. And the final one, item number 10, is an annual piece of committee narrative that requests that the judiciary submit a status report on major information technology development. And very quickly, before I end my presentation, one update that the Maryland Electronic Courts, MDEC, did go live in Montgomery County, which only leaves Prince George's County and Baltimore County before full implementation. And with that, I end my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Seeing no questions from the committee at this time, I'd like to bring up Chief Judge Getty, Chief Judge Mlsc, Administrator, I'm about to say Pam, Administrator Pam, but Administrator Harris. Yep, and
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, we'd like
Yes,
to
sir.
bring a third chair up.
please.
Thank you.
Before I get started, I'd just like to say on behalf of all of the committee, I know that I haven't been able to see you in person, but just congratulations on your ascension to Chief Judge, Court of Appeals.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee, my name is Joe Getty. I'm Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals, and our panel today includes Chief Judge John Mlsc of the District Court for Maryland and Pam Harris, the Director of the Administrative Office of Courts. She's known as the State Court Administrator. We provided you with written responses, which I think have been distributed in our handout. I thought I'd start with the recommended actions. There are 10 recommendations from DLS staff that Mr. Weiss just walked through with you. I can walk through them item by item, or I can tell you that the judiciary concurs with all 10 of the recommended actions. I know you have a hefty schedule this afternoon, and if you have any questions on those 10, I can entertain questions or move on to the next section. With regard to one of the recommendations, we would request a different reporting date, and that's recommendation number 5. Our current practice is to provide information to the General Assembly in November, but because of the way we calculate and verify information with the circuit courts, we're generally giving you year-old information. If the recommendation number 5 reporting date, which now is November 1st, was pushed back January 1st or December 15th, we think we can get the information verified through the circuit courts and be able to give you the prior fiscal year's data instead of 2 fiscal years prior. And we think that would be beneficial to all in your evaluation of the judiciary. So we concur with all 10 of the recommended actions. The first issue item is the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. Deb Seltzer of the corporation is here. We don't have any comments on the 3 issues that relate to the MLSC. They will testify next. The second issue is what Mr. Weiss discussed regarding the University of Baltimore study on the data necessary for the racial equity impact notes. And we're committed to do everything we can to give you that information. But we want to alert you to the fact that in some cases it's difficult for us to give that information to you. What the Schaefer Center says is the judiciary should enter racial data whenever we're doing an MDEC record. Well, frequently, we don't have that information before us. If a citation has been issued, and as you're aware, in 2013, the General Assembly passed a bill making a number of incarcerable or arrest offenses by citation. If a law enforcement officer is giving a citation, they don't record the racial data, and therefore it doesn't come to us. If that person then ends up in court, I don't think you want the judge asking at the sentencing, before I sentence you, I need to write down your racial data because I have the census that I'm taking. We've spent a number of years working and training with our judges on implicit bias and racial equity, and to introduce that as a topic in a court hearing, I think would be counterproductive to the main goal of the judiciary, which is fairness and equity in our deliberations. So we're committed to doing whatever we can to provide the data to you, but you have to understand in many situations that data isn't before us unless the law enforcement officer in a district court appearance provided that information. I know Senator Jackson understands that role of the process very well. The third issue is the Court Performance Measures Report. We've worked with the National Center for State Courts over a number of years in improving our court performance measures and other tracking devices. That's been done by our State Court Administrator, Pamela Harris, and I'll let her address issue number 3, 2021 Court Performance Measures Report.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Chairman McRae and other committee members, I never thought I was going to say this, but it's sort of nice being back in the hot seat in front of you. For the record, my name is Pam Harris, and I am the State Court Administrator. I would like to publicly thank Caleb Weiss, who has diligently worked toward understanding the functions and the issues of the Maryland judiciary, and we appreciate his patience with us. To expand a little more on issue number 2, we would like to just work with DLS on the data that they're looking for, and we'll talk with them about the difficulties we have with the collection of some of this data. But we are very happy to have dialogue with DLS in that manner to get you what we can get you. On issue 3, together with recommendation 5, as Mr. Weiss indicated, you're withholding $500,000 from our budget until we can provide the fiscal 22 annual core performance report. We can concur, but in doing so, as Judge Getty indicated, we would like just a little bit more time on filing that report. During the past 2 years throughout the COVID-19 emergency, all the district courts and circuit courts remained open under restricted operations. This was providing the essential functions necessary to address the emergency and the urgent matters before the courts. However, due to these limitations on case types, and the volume of matters capable of being addressed, coupled with protecting public health during the whole pandemic, Maryland, like other states, suspended the case time standards in the trial courts because there was no way that we could meet the time standards with cases not being heard. With those case processing times being suspended, there were no standards, as Mr. Weiss indicated, for years 20 and 21. However, knowing the importance of this tool for the trial courts, we engaged with the National Center for State Courts to update the time standards, as well as the judicial officer workload, the judge workload, the magistrate workload assessment, to ensure that we have current and comprehensive tools to forecast future resource needs and measure the performance of our courts. So as requested, the judiciary will indeed move forward with the analysis of the fiscal year 22 data at year end, but in doing so, we respectfully request that additional 30 days of time or 60 days of time to not have to submit that report until January 1st of 2023. And if there are no questions on that, I can move the conversation to Chief Judge Morrissey, who is going to take up the comments that DLS requested the judiciary comment on.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Chair McRae and members of this subcommittee. I'd also like to echo Ms. Harris's sentiment and thank Kelly Boyce for really immersing himself in the judiciary and learning how we do and what we do and why we do. So thank you, Caleb. The DLS asked us to comment on 2 issues, the first of which is the extent to which the COVID-19 pandemic is the cause of the decline across the district court for case types, and specifically as to landlord-tenant case types. The written testimony that we submitted goes into greater detail, but the short story is that the pandemic is the major contributing factor to the decline in filings of all case types, with the exception, unfortunately, of domestic violence filings, which has increased during the pandemic. With respect to failure to pay rent case filings, the judiciary believes that the combination of the pandemic, the federal legislative enactments, like if you remember back to 2 summers ago, in the summer of 2020, the CARES Act was introduced by the federal government, and then later on in September, the CDC agency order that limited evictions, and then coupled with Governor Hogan's orders regarding evictions, and then the distribution of the federal rental relief monies are the most significant factors in the decline in filings and resulting in evictions. They're off by about 60% from pre-pandemic, and that's been holding pretty much true for the last 6-8 months. The rental relief monies had a slow start, but really got off the ground, and the money's hitting where it is, and that's causing the landlords then not to have to file. The judiciary believes that the failure to pay rent case filings will slowly increase in fiscal 2023, although it is dependent on the continuation of these rental relief monies, any pending legislation regarding the filing fees for landlord-tenant cases that the Attorney General and others have submitted to this body, the start of the access to counsel in evictions programs by Mlsc, which we're looking forward to, and any surge that could occur again in the future for COVID-19. With respect to comment 2, DLS has asked us to comment on the pretrial home detention monitoring program. It also asks us to comment about outreach efforts in collaboration with executive agencies to ensure the funds are utilized to the greatest extent possible, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But the program is working well. It's in full force and effect out in the field, and I believe I heard somewhere upwards of 400 people are currently in the program. However, the implementation of the program has been extremely time-consuming and somewhat difficult for both the judiciary and the private home detention monitoring. They're called agencies, but these are private companies. There's 3 of them. There's only 3 that are licensed in the state of Maryland, and one of them is the main mover and shaker in this. By far, they're the largest and do the most, particularly in the city. To pay the invoices that the companies submit to us, they're required to provide documentation that they never previously maintained. They were private businesses, so they didn't need to deal with the government with relation to spending $5 million of federal funds and all that entails with the documentation required for audit purposes. It's been more challenging for these companies because the program started in October of this year, and there are already people on home detention at that time that came into the system, so they didn't have any of the paperwork that they needed. For new people, like if you were today to go in and sign up, they know what the requirements are of that paperwork and will get it when they start the process with the new individuals. So once we receive the invoice with the required documentations, then we have to send that out to the particular jurisdictions to verify that information to make sure that if they say they are hooking up someone on the 5th of December, that in fact they were hooked up on the 5th of December. And that's been a challenge and a lot of work for both the companies and for the courts. We've had multiple meetings and training sessions that have been conducted over the last 6 months to develop and implement the program, and it's currently requiring almost daily interaction with the courts and these private companies through phone calls, meetings, and trying to get it to work right. It will work. They're going to get paid. Right now, the biggest implement to the largest company is that they don't have a DUNS number, which is required to receive federal monies, and we've been trying to work with the company to understand what they need to do to make sure that they get that number so then we can pay them. So we have a bunch of outstanding invoices that are ready to get paid. Once they get that DUNS number in, we'll be able to pay them. Just so you're aware, to obtain private home detention, and this comes into outreach to other governmental agencies, there is no outreach to other governmental agencies. To obtain private home detention, the defendant must request the court to grant this pretrial release option. Typically, the public defender or private counsel is the person that makes that request on behalf of the defendant. As I was a private defense attorney before, I knew very well who all the players were in the private home detention monitoring programs, and it was my responsibility to bring that up to the judge, and I would also help to coordinate with them getting into these programs. So it's not really outreach to governmental entities. It's more we're just going to continue to work with these home providers to make sure they're providing us the documentation that we need for audit purposes and so that they can get paid. There is one other point that I'd like to raise to this committee, and that's the judiciary has no regulatory authority over these private companies. And I'm certainly arguing that we shouldn't have regulatory authority, but there's really nobody has regulatory authority over these. There's a licensure that the Department of Public Safety has over these, but it's minimal COMAR regs that require what it's necessary to become one of these companies. But there's no regulation over, are they doing what they say they're doing, and are they providing real monitoring over these individuals that are out as an option instead of incarceration at the time. So we're hopeful we were hopeful that there was a work group with the original bill, House Bill 316, that this work group would look at these and other issues, but to our knowledge, that work group either never formed, or if they have formed, they've not reached out to us, and we don't know if and what they're doing right now. So in closing, the program's working well. We're working with the individual companies to make sure that they get paid, and I think going forward, we'll be in a much better spot for the courts. So, thank you, Senator. I'd like to turn it back over to Chief Judge.
Well, Mr. Chair, that concludes our response. We're open for any questions if the committee has any.
Thank you. I do have one question dealing with the racial impact studies that was discussed. So information was taken in. Obviously, you all, I'm assuming in the response that you gave that you said that you would be providing, I guess, what you are able to provide with your challenges. Were they provided to DLS when they were collecting the other data, or, and if they weren't provided, why weren't they provided?
Most of the data that comes in would come in through our district court commissioner. If somebody files in circuit court and there's not an arrest, like any type of state's attorney action, there wouldn't be demographic data available. I think Chief Judge Morrissey can sort of walk through how the district court commissioner process works. But what's being requested is that we do a census of racial data on everybody who comes through the court system. And in many cases, we don't have that information. If you get a traffic citation and you decide to pay the traffic citation without appearing in court, we don't have a record with that information. Well, it might be on the driver's license, but that doesn't mean the court has access to your driver's license. And Chief Judge Morrissey, would you like to add a little?
Sure, absolutely. On anyone that's arrested, we typically would have that data. The commissioners who would be the first person to see that person would try to verify that data by self-identity. The person, they'd ask them whether or not this is the data or not. Once it gets past the commissioner's part, we do have that data, and we have provided that data.
Okay.
Like when it comes to me on bail review as a judge, though, I'm not going to ask that question because there's a lot of reasons. You might not want to ask someone whether they're homeless, for example.
Yep.
Because that could cut both ways. It could be that they're less likely to appear in court in the future. And even when I advise people when I'm taking a plea, when I advise people of the immigration implications of pleading guilty, I specifically don't ask what nationality or any of those type of demographics. I do it to everyone, and I make sure my wording is very neutral. I just say if by pleading guilty here today, if you're in the United States on any type of immigration status, pleading guilty here could cause a problem with that immigration status, including an up to deportation. So there's reasons why we wouldn't want to ask that data, but we do whatever we have in the commissioners do a good job in verifying that that's actually the data that they have. We do produce. We just numerous steps along the way we don't do that, and for reasons I don't think we probably can in the future.
Nope, that's what I just wanted to be clear on, and that's what I wasn't clear on prior to your response from that standpoint. At the minimum, was that information provided? And I think that's what you're basically saying is yes, at the commissioner level, what they're able to take in, that you all are providing that to DLS. So I wholeheartedly understand what you're talking about in reference to the bias that could come when a person's being sentenced or some type of actions being taken, but there are preliminary steps which you did say was being addressed. I do know that this was just a very sensitive and important piece. Specifically, I believe our speaker worked on it. I know Jazz Lewis worked on it in the House of Delegates. Like, it's one of those pieces just from a data standpoint. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, publicly, Judge, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Look forward to working with you going forward. Now that I'm back on the Budget Committee, that's just a personal note. Judge Morrissey, you mentioned the regulatory component, that the judiciary doesn't have the regulatory authority over these private companies. You said I believe you said the licensing comes through, via Comar, but what did you say about DPSCS?
They're the licensing authority for these, and so they'll, there's only 3 of them. There was, I believe, 4 at one point, but they decertified one of them. For what reasons, I don't know. They just send us a notice that says, these are the people that are licensed, and this person was no longer licensed. The 4th one occurred 2 years, even before this program. I just remember seeing it and didn't even realize that DPSCS was the licensing authority over them.
Okay, thank you. I'll defer to DPSCS.
Senator Jackson, I think
Yes.
the underlying question here is the judiciary the right place to make these payments to private entities for home detention? The funds were sent to the judiciary because it was felt that in the courtroom, maybe we were the easiest and quickest way to get a response to have pass-through funds go to this purpose. But if we don't have regulatory authority over the entities, that sort of creates a gap in the system. And whether it should be an executive branch agency that is doing this, either Department of Public Safety and Correction or even the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention,
That's what I was saying about.
that would be a more solid budgetary path for that to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. I was thinking of that particular agency. That's who we have set those measures with in the past with some other agencies. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions. Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologize for being late, but I had a function up home I had to get to. First, just want to, I guess the word's congratulations. I'm not sure if that's what you use on retirement or not, Judge. But,
I think it's called lame duck.
Okay, well, there are a couple of us in here. So we go way back. We worked together a long time in the legislature and working on issues of our part of the state, which you're part of the Western Maryland delegation. So I just want to wish you good luck, and if I can ever help you out with anything, let me know.
Thank you, Senator. Same here.
Thank you.
Now, seeing no further questions for the judiciary, I just want to first just lean in on behalf of the committee. Just thank you all for your leadership. Chief Judge Morrissey, Madam Administrator Harris, and Chief Judge Getty, in reference to just navigating this pandemic. We know that it's not easy in reference to you have a variety of issues, whether it's circuit court issues, whether it's our district court issues that our folks are navigating. Just want to say thank you all for your leadership during this time because it's very important. Colleagues, at this time, we'll bring up Director Seltzer to give us the testimony from the Merlin Services Corporation.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee. My name is Deb Seltzer. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. MLSC was created by the General Assembly in 1982 to be a statewide funder of civil legal aid, and last year we were named the administrator of the Access to Counsel in Evictions program. I too want to thank Mr. Weiss for his thorough dive into this topic, as well as the judiciary for their continued partnership with MLSC's regular funding and with these special projects. I'm going to address the 3 comments that were related to the Access to Counsel in Evictions program in the analysis. First, we were asked to comment on the Relief Act funds that we received last year during last year's session. Those funds are restricted for eviction prevention legal services. We have deployed $2.1 million of the $3 million that are out in the field right now for eviction prevention legal services. The remainder will be carried over to next year to ensure that as the Access to Counsel and Evictions program starts, there are no gaps in the ongoing programming. There are a number of case types or geographies or service models that may not be ready for implementation in Access to Counsel may not be eligible for the access to counsel funding sources that we receive in the first year. So this will allow us to make sure that anywhere that is currently receiving service can maintain that service kind of alongside access to counsel as access to counsel gets implemented fully. Secondly, we enthusiastically agree with the recommendation that $6.4 million be appropriated for the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. The task force that Mr. Weiss mentioned did name an appropriation as the most appropriate way to fund this program, and really having a stable funding source will be vital to the success of this program that will happen statewide. And finally, we are happy to provide quarterly reports on this program. Just 2 points I would like to make. Under the Access to Counsel legislation, we are already required to provide an annual report by August 31st of each year. So if that would be acceptable, we would ask that we kind of substitute that annual report for the fourth quarter report, which will give us sufficient time to close out the end of the fiscal year and would include all of the same information. I also want to note that the report recommendations included a recommendation that we have a cost per case, or how the attorneys are paid per case. Just as a note that Mlsc does not generally make grants on a cost per case basis. Much of this work will be done by staff attorneys at our nonprofit grantees. The cost per case will vary widely depending on that grantee's model, depending on which jurisdiction they're providing services in, depending on the complexity of the case. So we will certainly be able to provide budget information and averages, but the cost per case may not be the best measure going forward when looking at this program. And those are my comments, so I'm happy to answer any questions on this program.
Senator Jackson.
So you mentioned that it may not be the best way to that an average may be better. Are you saying that may not be the best way, or is there no way of getting that information?
No, we can certainly provide an average. It's just that we don't make, for example, contracts that say to a provider, you'll provide X number of cases for this number of dollars, because we recognize that each case fluctuates wildly in how much time it may take, how much discovery may be needed. So we grant a total amount and ask for case projections, but then when we get those cases, we get them reported by level of service. So we recognize that a case that just needs 15 minutes of advice, so you can tell a tenant, oh, here's a form you need to fill out, here's where you can go for rental assistance, versus a full litigation case, which may take, hours and hours of work, are not going to be equally measured.
But there is the responsibility of them to provide you with the costs, correct?
Absolutely, and
Okay.
we collect that, but as opposed to per case, we collect that as a budget for the whole program. So for their whole grant for that program, they'll provide us with information. Here's how much we spent on attorneys. Here's how much we spent on paralegals. Here's how much we spent on paper and supplies. So we absolutely collect that budgetary information.
Okay, and maybe that's what we're looking for. We'll speak with the analyst regarding that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, and I got one question in reference to the same, in reference to access to counsel about the quarterly reports also. So in a piece of the testimony that was provided, it was stated that more data would be necessary. I just want to make sure that you're going to be okay with the 4 pieces that they're requesting from that piece. I'll read some of them. The total number of cases received legal representation by case type, so i.e. breach of lease, non-payment of rent, things of that nature. The second one, data on the case dispositions that were decided during the relevant year. The third one, the amount of state and federal funds allocated to each grantee. And the last one, how many individuals, if any, received legal representation for multiple cases during that respective quarter.
So some of those things are not things we currently collect. For example, we collect data on eviction cases, but we do not break it down by breach of lease versus failure to pay rent versus tenant holding over. That is something we are going to add for this program because we know that will be important to say, for example, are these breach of lease cases, tenant holding over, taking much more time than failure to pay rent, looking at the growth of those types of cases over the course of the pandemic as opposed to the failure to pay rent cases. The funding is obviously something that we already collect because we are kind of the pass-through granting agency. We currently collect some dispositions, but we will be collecting more detail on, for example, each type of case and their success rate. So those are some things we will be collecting for our grantees. They are not things that we have for every single case. We will only have them for the ones that our grantees are working on. So we're imagining that the Access to Counsel program will have a phase-in period. We won't be able to serve every single tenant right away. So for those folks who are unfortunately not able to have counsel, we won't have any data for them. We will only have it for the ones provided by our grantees.
Right, so from what I'm hearing from your response, it shouldn't be a problem with the 4 data points that they're asking to be added in.
No, those are things that we're either already collect or are able to add.
I appreciate you. Seeing no further questions, this ends the hearing for the judiciary. Just want to say once again, thank you for your leadership and what you're doing on this very, very important subject matter. And Mr. Weiss, I think that everybody else already gave you accolades, but on behalf of the committee, just wanted to say thank you for your detail and commitment in reference to the agency report out.
Thank you.
At this time, we will bring up, it looks like, the Merlin Energy Administration, MEA, Samuel Quest.
All right, thank you, Chairman McCray. Once again, this is the budget for the Maryland Energy Administration. As you can see on the screen in front of you, the fiscal 23 allowance totals $74.5 million. This is a decrease of $19.5 million from the 2022 working appropriation. This decrease is primarily due to increased fiscal 2022 spending, as well as decreased amount of funds budgeted from the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund. Turning to the first exhibit, this is showing the amount of spending compared to energy savings achieved through the Jane E. Lawton Conservation Loan Program. There were a total of 3 projects funded in fiscal 21, totaling about $1.6 million. This was about 78% of the allowable spending that year under the program. In fiscal 2022, the program continues its arrangement of reserving funding for both state agencies and nonprofits during the first portion of the year in order to ensure access to funding for both groups. However, if there is higher demand from state agencies, then it allows additional funding in the second year, as has been the case in recent years. Exhibit number 2 is showing the energy savings and spending for the 2 energy efficiency grant programs. As you can see from the chart, the number of the amount of energy savings is increasing despite the fact that the amount of funding decreased in fiscal 2021. In fiscal 2022, the spending in these areas is significantly increased, and as a result, it's projected that the energy savings will continue to grow in future fiscal years. Exhibit 3 is showing the amount of in-state renewable energy generation by source for Maryland. This is data that's reported by the U.S. Energy Information Administration. The estimate in calendar 2020 was that there was about 4,200 megawatt hours generated, and as the chart shows, the largest sources were hydroelectric and solar. Through its renewable and clean energy programs, MEA awards grants to incentivize production of renewable energy in a variety of sources, and the estimate was approximately 2,800 grants in a variety of areas were awarded in fiscal 2021. Exhibit 4 is showing data on the electric vehicle market in Maryland. In fiscal 21, there was a total of just under 35,000 zero-emission vehicles registered in the state, along with about 2,700 public vehicle charging stations. In order to incentivize the expansion of the electric vehicle market, the state of Maryland had previously offered the electric vehicle excise tax credit for vehicles purchased between 2011 and 2020. However, no additional credits were authorized for vehicles purchased after July 1st, 2020. Additionally, MEA currently offers the electric vehicle supply equipment rebate program to incentivize the adoption of electric vehicle charging stations. This is in addition to a pilot program that the Maryland Public Service Commission offers for investor-owned utilities to also incentivize adoptions of publicly available electric vehicle chargers. Turning to the budget discussion section of the analysis, I'd like to start out with pointing out the budget amendment that was processed in fiscal 22. This appropriated an additional $31.6 million from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund due to higher revenues than it originally projected. This included a total of about $28.6 million in additional spending to MEA programs, as well as a $3 million appropriation to the Department of General Services. The largest increase from this amendment was an additional $16.2 million for renewable and clean energy programs and initiatives within MEA. The analysis also in this section includes a discussion of the federal infrastructure bill, which includes a wide variety of far-reaching provisions in the energy sector. One of the largest is for investments in the electric grid and investing in electric grid resiliency and upgrades. It is anticipated that the Public Service Commission will also play a large role in the distribution of some of these funds due to their role as the chief regulatory body over utilities in the state. The other large item that I would point out is the State Energy Program, which receives some supplemental funding. It's estimated in fiscal 22, Maryland will receive approximately $8.9 million. Additionally, there will be an estimate of $1.8 million from the Energy Efficiency Revolving Loan Fund Capitalization Program from the U.S. Department of Energy. Although outside of these funds, it's currently unknown what the exact dollar amount of allocations of other energy-related funding, as well as exactly how it will be distributed amongst state agencies and incorporated into the budget. There are some other large items I would also point out. There's funding for electric vehicle charging infrastructure, as well as several investments in supply chains for renewable energy technologies, fuel and technology infrastructure investments, research demonstration, and other provisions. The analysis is asking MEA to comment on any preparations it is making to use or administer any federal funds in this area that Maryland receives through the bill. Turning now to the overview of the fiscal 23 allowance, in Exhibit 5, you can see that over half of the budget is for renewable and clean energy programs, including funds from the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund. The other, about 1/3 of the budget, covers both of the energy efficiency grant programs. If you turn to the funding by source, which is shown in Exhibit 6, the largest fund source is special funds from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund from the sale of carbon dioxide emissions allowances through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative program. The other large area of funding is from Public Service Commission ordered settlements, and those settlement details are listed in Exhibit 7. The largest of these is the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund. There's $18.5 million budgeted from that fund in 2023. These Individual funds also include the Exelon Animal to Waste Energy Alternative Compliance Payments, the Offshore Wind Development Fund, and the separate Maryland Offshore Wind Business Development Fund, which is outside of the SEAF fund. The analysis also notes that there are additional fund balance but not budgeted in 2023 from the PEPCO Most Favored Nation provision settlement, and DLS is asking MEA to comment on its future plans for usage of those funds. As you can see from Exhibit 7, the total dollar amounts from these fund sources are decreasing each year as the fund balances are spent out of these funds. It's estimated that only the Renewable Portfolio Standard Alternative Compliance Payments and the Maryland Offshore Wind Business Development Fund may potentially add funding in each year. So as funds are spent out of this area, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative funds will play an even larger role in the funding sources. Exhibit 8 shows the changes in the budget. As I mentioned previously, the total decrease is about $19.5 million, of which the largest is $17.8 million of that decrease is in the renewable and clean energy programs. Within that program, the largest decrease is $7.8 million from the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund. I'm not going to go through each of these individual items, but the chart on pages 16 and 17 of the analysis outlines most of the programmatic changes, and many of these correspond to increased funding in the budget amendment that was processed in fiscal 22. A little bit more about the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund change. As members of the committee may remember, last year the General Assembly restricted about $18.8 million of funds out of this fund. The funds were restricted to be transferred to the Department of Human Services Office of Home Energy Programs for bill payment and arrearage assistance. The funds were not restricted for the purpose which the General Assembly restricted them, and are instead again budgeted within MEA and the Maryland Energy Infrastructure Program in fiscal 23. There was about $7.5 million in grant funding that were awarded to applicants in this program in 2022. The analysis is asking MEA to comment on why the funds were not released for the purpose that the General Assembly restricted them for. Turning to the personnel overview, the one item that I'd point out here is that there's an increase of one regular position and a decrease of one contractual full-time equivalent. These are both accounting specialist positions. However, MEA notes that these, while similar, are not a direct contractual conversion. And in the issues section of the analysis, the one issue is providing additional discussion of Strategic Energy Investment Fund activity. Exhibit number 9 on the screen is showing the summary of auction results from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative quarterly carbon dioxide emission allowance auctions. Auction 54, which was held in December, the total allowance price reached $13 per allowance, and the total proceeds received by the state of Maryland exceeded $44 million. And for both of those items, this is the largest dollar amount in the history of Maryland's participation in the program. In that auction, there was a total of 27 million carbon dioxide emission allowances that were sold, which included additional cost containment reserve allowances that were released due to the high clearing price attained. Although, as shown in this chart, the growth has been notable in the past year or so in the history of the program. In earlier years, this has not been the case. There's been a little bit more variation, which has caused the revenues that were projected by MEA in the budget to not always align well with the actual revenues achieved. As a result, in previous years, MEA had adopted a conservative method of estimating the revenue from these auctions by using the minimum auction clearing price and using the actual amount of revenue attained over that estimate in the following budget cycle. So for example, the fiscal 21 overattainment is used in fiscal 2023. However, beginning with the fiscal 23 budget cycle, MEA is slightly altering its revenue projection method by instead using a rolling average of the clearing prices from the two most recent auctions. In the fiscal 23 budget cycle, this is $6.50 per allowance compared to the $2.44 minimum clearing price, which would have been used under the old revenue projection method. As a result, this allows for projections to more closely align with actual revenues achieved. However, this is still a conservative method for budgeting since the actual clearing prices from auctions have exceeded $6.50 in each auction since auction 49 in September of 2020. Exhibit number 10 is showing the statutorily required distributions of these revenues into the sub-accounts of the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. This is laid out in the state government article. 50% is restricted for energy assistance, 10% is required for each of the energy efficiency programs, 20% for renewable and clean energy programs initiatives, and for the administration up to 10% but capped at $5 million. Exhibit 11 is showing other statutorily required transfers. The first is for the dues for participation of Maryland in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative Program, which is $300,000 in fiscal 2023. The second item in 2023 is $2.1 million to the Maryland Energy Innovation Fund. This was increased to $2.1 million due to legislation passed during the special session earlier this winter, and the funds from this appropriation support the Maryland Energy Innovation Institute at the University of Maryland, as well as the Maryland Clean Energy Center. Exhibit 12 is showing the appropriations from the CEF fund to individual state agencies across sub-accounts. There's a total of $143.8 million from this account, and the largest area is in the Department of Human Services Office of Home Energy Programs, about $82.8 million of the total. This is also the largest area of increase. There's an increase of about $50.9 million in the energy assistance area. As far as within the Maryland Energy Administration, spending from this area is mostly stable, decreasing by a little under $50,000. The other notable transfers outside of MEA include transfers to the Department of General Services Office of Energy and Sustainability, transfers to the Maryland Department of Health for energy performance contracts, and two other statutorily required allocations from the Clean Energy Jobs Act of 2019, which include transfers to the Small Minority and Women-Owned Business account within the Maryland Department of Commerce, and transfers to the Maryland EARN program within the Maryland Department of Labor. Exhibit 13 is showing the estimated fund balances at the end of the year. The end of year fiscal 21 fund balance is $108.2 million, and in 2022 it's estimated that this will increase to $113 million. Similar to projections in prior fiscal years, it's likely that the 2023 fund balance is understated due to the method of revenue projection, and that once actual revenues are known, it's likely that this could be similar or even exceed the fiscal 22 estimate. And these growth in fund balances reflect the continued growth in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative program, as well as the change in revenue projection method by MEA discussed previously. There are some changes within the individual sub-accounts due to realignment of interest and fund balance from the administration sub-account. As you can see in Exhibit 13, at the end of fiscal 2021, the administration account had achieved a balance of over 36 million. MEA is planning to reallocate about 30 million of that to the other 4 sub-accounts. And in 2022 and 2023, MEA is projecting that revenues to the administration sub-account will exceed the $5 million statutory cap on distributions to that account, and there will be approximately 2.1 million in fiscal 22 and 1.3 million in fiscal 23 available to transfer for the other sub-accounts. DLS is making a couple of observations. The first is that although these transfers from the administration sub-account are not required to be distributed under any formula, the formula provided by MEA provides limited benefit to the Department of Human Services due to the fact that the other sub-accounts receive about a 3% increase over the statutory formula, while the Department of Human Services account does not. The final item that DLS notes in the analysis is that the future revenue projections in future fiscal years for Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative allowance revenue, DLS is concerned that the renewable and clean energy programs will receive the full 20%, so we're asking MEA to comment on the projected revenue allocation method. Finally, turning to the recommended action section, there are 2 recommendations that DLS is making. The first is annual language, which asks for the Department of Budget and Management to include fund accounting from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund with the submission of the governor's budget books, as has been done in prior years. The second recommendation is for the committee to adopt a narrative asking for a report on the status of the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund as well as activities from that account in the previous year. That will conclude the DLS presentation. I can take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Quest. Seeing no questions from the committee at this moment, I'd like to bring up Director Tung from the Maryland Energy Administration.
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the committee for having me here today. For the record, my name is Mary Beth Tung, Director of the Maryland Energy Administration. I have with me here the Chief of Staff, Chris Rice, and some of my finance folks and whatnot are with me as well, if they are needed to help us out with some answers. I also want to thank DLS analyst Sam Quist. I know this is your first year trying to dig in, and our budget is a little bit weird. I think everybody's budget's a little bit weird, but ours is a little bit more weird, I think, than a lot of budgets, and you had to try to wrap your arms around not only our budget, but the whole area of energy, which is changing rapidly and not so easy to wrap your arms around. So we really want to thank you for all your efforts and working with us and us working with you, and it's been a great relationship, so thank you very much. I also want to say right off the bat that MEA is in agreement with the recommendations in the DLS budget analysis. I don't want to repeat our written testimony. I think you all can read, but I do want to share a few of the successes over our past year. On low and moderate income programs, we launched a new low-income solar program. This new program is being offered in parallel with MEA's longstanding and highly successful low to moderate income energy efficiency program. Feel that it's really important to have the two together so that the home is energy efficient, so that any savings from the solar program doesn't literally go out the window. The solar program engages and builds capacity amongst the nonprofit and local governments who we currently work with to deliver energy efficiency improvements to those most in need. Many of these communities work well with nonprofit organizations in their community and maybe not so much with the government agency that they're not as used to. So we found it very advantageous to work with community organizations and local governments who the community is more familiar with and work with on a regular basis. Delivering energy efficiency coupled with clean energy provides a greater and longer-term reduction in energy burden and reduces the need for future energy assistance payments. We envision continued growth in this area of MEA's portfolio and continue to engage stakeholders to identify programming that can address clean energy access, energy affordability, and related equity issues. The Clean Fuels Incentive Program. This is the second year of the Clean Fuels Incentive Program, providing incentives for the purchase of medium and heavy-duty alternative fuel vehicles for fleets. This leverages fleet commitments for alternative transportation fuels, including electrification. And in fiscal 21, this program provided core initial funding for Montgomery County Public Schools initiative to launch an electrified school bus fleet, leveraging a vehicle infrastructure lease arrangement. A model other communities have expressed interest in replicating, and I've heard from folks from other places in the country about this program and how they would like to also do their programs very similarly. And so Maryland's sort of at the top of the heap on this one, so we're really proud of that one. The Maryland Gas Expansion Fund, which was mentioned earlier, we have received unprecedented demand for funding of natural gas access to reduce emissions and costs. The use of natural gas to replace home heating oil or diesel is phenomenal. It completely reduces to almost nothing any particulates, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, reduces nitrogen and nitrogen oxides and sulfur oxides. So it's really for some areas that are more reliant on home heating oil and diesel, it's really does a lot to clean up the air. There's over $31 million in asks, the largest turnout of any MEA's program over the last fiscal year. And of course, we don't have $31 million to give out in programs, so we had to really cut back on some of those requests. There's strong needs, particularly from public schools, to modernize systems to reduce emissions, improve comfort, improve safety, and reduce costs by eliminating aged systems burning dirty fuel. So we've really had a lot of requests from various school districts, particularly in Baltimore City, Anne Arundel County, to name two of the districts that have been asking. The CEF budget and fund balances was mentioned earlier as well. The new budget methodology for CEF revenue will allow quicker deployment of RGGI auction proceeds into the state budget. What happens is as the auctions take place, there's 4 a year, they're budgeted directly, or they're deposited directly into our account, but then, of course, we can't use them until the next budget cycle. So sometimes these funds are in the account for almost 2 years before they can even be used. So we had a large, because of the larger increase in RGGI revenues this year and last year, those funds were sitting there unused, so we did a budget amendment to be able to use some of those funds a little bit sooner than would have been earlier. It is important to maintain modest CEF fund balances in an effort to provide fiscal stability and continuity of CEF-funded activity if and when the RGGI auction prices decline. And one of the presents I got when I first became director was a huge decrease in RGGI revenues to the point where we had to reduce our budget at the end by 75%. We don't want to go through that again. So we were budgeting at the floor, and we found out that was a little bit too conservative, particularly now in the face of the increases in CEF revenues. So we're using the last 2 years of revenues so that we can then average those out, as was discussed by Mr. Quist. Finally, federal funds. We're aware there's a lot of interest in federal funds, and we're hoping that the federal infrastructure funds that details should be forthcoming soon. We're fully postured to maximize federal funding acquisition and use. While there are more details in MEA's written testimony, I would like to assure you that my team is closely monitoring developments coming out of the U.S. Department of Energy, which is just reorganized, so they're a little slower than, let's say, the U.S. DOT, who has gotten their funding their funding requirements out a little bit earlier. And we have multiple staff members with hands-on federal experience from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, lovingly known as ARRA, that will make MEA well-positioned for federal fund implementation. So we're already working on that. once we find out. A lot of the funds are going to be competitive. Those are the ones we're not that aware of what's coming and what the priorities of the DOE will be. So we're on top of that. We're in constant communication with them and with our national agency, NASIO, who's in even better contact with them as to what those competitive programs might be. So we're looking into that now, and we'll hopefully get information sooner than later. So that concludes my testimony, if there's any questions.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just if you could expound a little bit on the impact of the expansion funds not being utilized. I know it had a breakdown of regions, and for me in particular, the region where it mentioned Calvert Charles, St. Mary's County, and the report states that those funds were not used, and then, but in the recommendation from our analysts, it speaks of the funds that weren't used that should be used going forward, and a expectation of a report coming forward.
Oh, okay.
Gas expenditure funds.
Yeah. There was a percentage of the funds that were fenced off, so we couldn't use those. So we used $7.5 million, and those funds were allocated this year. There was a Attorney General opinion that the funds could not be used for anything other than what they were supposed to be used for by the PSC. These are PSC merger funds. So this year, it's in the budget. We're hoping we're going to be able to use those funds this year. And again, working with various school districts and other folks who want to use those funds to put in cleaner systems. I don't know if I'm answering your questions or not.
I guess, I appreciate that backdrop, but I guess if funds were not expended, was it because they did not meet the criteria met, the requirement of what the use was for, or was it not spent due to some other factors?
They weren't spent because we were allocated appropriated $7.5 million and got $39 million in applications. And so there was a large, gap between what was appropriated and the demand in the program.
Is there a breakdown? Of? I see where there was 4.6 for that southern region and Frederick. Well, but is there a breakdown of what was not, other than the statement back on at the beginning of the presentation, the issue statement? Maybe that's for the analysts.
We can give you a breakdown of how the funds were used,
Yes.
certainly. Yes, we can do that for you.
Okay, I'm particularly interested to make sure that the criteria is being met for
Yes.
the use of it, and if they weren't, or the fact that they weren't used, was there a negative impact to the region
Okay.
as we're moving up? And obviously in certain areas, the growth expansion also may or may not play a role in that, so.
Yeah, some of these funds, by PSC order, a certain percentage has to be done in WGL service territory, 50%. So 50% can be used elsewhere. A lot of the need up till now has been more in Somerset County, Baltimore City, and so forth, which is not WGL territory. So that's one thing we have to look at as well when we're going to, use these funds. So there is a criteria that we have to follow, both from the PSC and internally, of what these funds are supposed to be used for, so we can provide that to you.
Yeah, I know
certainly.
some of those areas I mentioned, Mr. Chairman, were not in the WGL area. We are living near those areas, and we're on the propane or natural gas lines outside of that. So I'd appreciate that, and maybe for the committee as well. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
And Senator Jackson, we'll get our analysts to kind of follow up with the questions that you may have and make sure that everybody on the committee gets information, that information. Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple quick questions, if I might. On Exhibit 3, the analyst presented on page 7 talks about in-state renewable energy generation by source. The list utility scale solar, small scale solar, PV, hydro, wind, and other. What is under the other category?
Biomass, I think is
Biomass.
one. I think geothermal is
Geothermal,
also one.
biomass.
Yeah. Those are probably the two of the larger others. But as you can see, is a small percentage.
Okay, can you explain in a little more detail what this gas expansion fund is?
Yes, sir. The gas expansion fund came out of the Alta Gas WGL merger, and there were about $100 million that were awarded by the Public Service Commission. 70 million of that went to WGL for expansion in areas that didn't currently have gas. A lot of that was to, again, try to displace diesel and home heating fuel and that kind of thing. And then 30 million was allocated to, these are round numbers, to MEA, and we named it the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund. The program is the Maryland Energy Infrastructure Program. And so those funds are from the PSC. They are in our account right now. 1 year, all the funds were fenced. Last year, part of the funds were fenced. So we were trying to use what we were allocated and appropriated for the gas expansion fund. So the requirements, we have 2 areas of interest. One is to provide funding for folks who want to upgrade. This would be for changeover boilers and whatnot. And this is for residents and commercial, although commercial has been pretty much the entire cost. I think 100% of it's been commercial. So upgrading boiler systems and whatnot, not the last mile of piping that might need to go in, those kinds of things. The other would actually go to the utility companies to help lower the cost as new customers come on. Old customers are not permitted by law to support new customers coming onto gas. So they have to pay for the pipes and the substations and everything that goes into providing the service. So there's funds that can go into critical areas where they're expanding to help lower the cost for homeowners. And so a lot of these are in rural areas, particularly. A lot of those rural areas, there's large distances between homes and businesses, so the cost can get quite high. And in various urban areas, particularly the city, the residents are probably not as able to pay for those upgrades as would be, residents that are a little bit wealthier. So those, that area of interest would go into the utilities that would specifically use the money to reduce the cost to the homeowners and the businesses. That is the ultimate goal of that program.
Time flies by, but several years ago, I asked your staff, and I don't know if any of them's here to check in with Garrett County, had 2 potential projects for gas. One would go to an industrial park from the main line on the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. Other one would go from town of Grantsville to the top of the hill east of Grantsville, which includes a lot of businesses and restaurants and hotels and that kind of thing, which now use propane and probably would like to use natural gas.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what happened, so can I ask someone to contact or get with me, and I'll tell you to contact to check out and see if they're still interested, and if things have changed, it now might allow them to tap into some of this for either one or whatever.
Absolutely, and I love Grantsville. My husband and I just went there last year as kind of a long weekend kind of thing, so it's a great area. So yeah, we can look into that. And get
Next
back to
time you're there, yell hi. I live in the town of Grantsville.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think I yelled hi when I went by. You didn't see me.
The last question I have, Mr. Chairman, is you mentioned Montgomery County with electric buses. What are we doing to help out Montgomery County? There's a bill in this year to kind of mandate, I guess, every school system has to convert or get electric buses, which I'm told run about $300,000 and some a piece. I don't know how accurate that is. So my concern is, a lot of these counties they own the buses. They're not contracted. Garrett County, Allegheny County, 3 counties I represent, most of them are contractors. I have no idea how a local little contractor is gonna spend $300,000 to buy an electric bus. So what are we doing for Montgomery County? With, you mentioned you got a program there. What's going on there?
Right, I'll let Chris knows more about this than I do.
Through the Clean Fuels Incentive Program, we assisted Montgomery County in purchasing those buses. We didn't pay the entire freight of them, but we did provide some assistance to them. We also have provided assistance to other school systems for propane fired school buses, and in the private sector, I believe Peapod was another grantee. But that program is specifically to help pay down the incremental cost associated with medium and heavy duty alternative transportation vehicles.
So is a $300,000 price range reasonable for an electric school bus, or do you know?
Well, is it reasonable, or is it
Well,
accurate?
is that where we're headed? Let's put it that way.
I think that those numbers are fairly accurate.
Yeah.
Reasonableness is in the eye of the beholder, though.
Well, I think it's a little ridiculous, but that's my opinion. One more question, Mr. Chairman. I know you have a tremendous number of programs that do a great job. I know some of this money, certain programs go to help public buildings or schools to upgrade their electrical appliances or wiring and all that kind of stuff to make it more efficient. Is included in that, or could be included in whatever program that is. You know, a lot of schools have outdoor activities where they have lights on ball fields and stuff. Some of them want to upgrade those to get more modern lights that use less electricity. A lot of the communities, but a lot of specifically smaller communities, have community parks through program Open Space, basically. And they have lights on their ball, or would like to have, so the public can use the facilities at night. Are any of those kind of projects eligible for any kind of program you have?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And if so, can you tell me what they are and who the contact is for that?
Absolutely.
Or maybe tell the whole committee that.
We have a couple programs that could possibly be utilized. One is a commercial, industrial, and agricultural energy efficiency grant program that could be utilized for lighting upgrades. The Jane E. Lawton loan program, that could be utilized for those lighting upgrades. We are rolling out a new street lighting program as well. And then finally, the Maryland Smart Energy Community Program, that is geared specifically towards local municipalities. They could take advantage of funds in that program to make those upgrades as well.
So if you could get us a copy of, like a bullet, this program can do this program can do that, and who do they contact? Because I know some communities might, and some schools in my area, are looking to upgrade the lights or addition lights that they don't have now, and do need some financial help to do that, so I would greatly appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I just had one quick question. I could assume I know the answer, but just wanted to be clear on it. It looked like about $20 million in reduction of grants between energy efficiency conservation programs, renewable and clean energy. Just wanted to get a idea, and I'm looking at page 30 is what I'm looking at. Between 30 and 29.
About a $20 million reduction.
Yeah, say minus 28%, and then it says minus 30% under 7 and 8.
Correct, and I think, if I could.
Yes. This is Mr. Wyatt Shiflett. He's the, our finance director.
Wyatt Shiflett, Director of Finance Administration. I believe our analyst, Mr. Quince, addressed this in his report. The comparison year over year has to do with a budget amendment that was approved. So that does make the year-over-year comparison look like a $20 million reduction. But if we back out the almost $30 million that was approved in the budget amendment because of the successful resi auctions, it looks less drastic in the reduction. So that really is the anomaly that we're seeing there.
Nope, I thought that was it. I just wanted to clarify because I saw it and wanted to make sure, so.
I thought that was it. I just want to make sure, and he's the guy to make sure that we get the right information.
Nope, we
So-
find ourselves in the same situation.
There you
Glad
go.
we got this guy.
That's right. We are very lucky to have him.
Senator Sailing.
By the time it gets to me, you've already answered the questions. Pretty much, you got it. But I just wanted to add on what Senator Edwards was saying. We see, like in our community colleges, what they've been doing and how they've been using a ton of solar, which benefits them. And I want to also know with other communities or businesses, small, women, whatever, that can also benefit from this too. That's really the major thing I would love to see, because we know there's a lot of funds, a lot of incentive, and if we can help those out and make them more efficient and wise in that sense, I think we can help them out and they'll help themselves out. So if we can get that information also, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, part of our, I'm glad you brought that up, Senator. A lot of our challenges are getting word out. As you know, we've got programs that we can help, particularly the public institutions and local jurisdictions and whatnot. We do have the funds to help them out and trying to get word out so that they know what the programs are, you know, and as Senator Edwards was saying, who to contact. It's all on our website, but, you know, everybody's overwhelmed with so many things to do and trying to, you know, get on a website and weave through that. And we are improving our website, by the way, to make that easier. But, yeah, we'll get that information to you. And any help we can get and getting word out to the communities and to your communities as to what's available would be greatly appreciated, because we want good applications and we want to help folks out as much as we can. So, because you're right, in the long run, you know, it's money. It's money in the bank, you know, that is being saved.
And I get, well, like, for instance, BG&E went into my house. So they checked all the lighting and everything else in there for smart lighting and everything, which is the same thing I love to see our businesses do the same thing. And then at the same time, if they can have solar or if they can have anything else that would benefit them in the long run, I think it'd be a good thing to show that the state is working with them to try to help them out. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. And seeing no further questions, Director Tung, Chief of Staff Rice, the entire team, just want to say thank you all for your leadership. Director Tung, I just also want to lift up the level of proactive communication that comes out of your agency is phenomenal. So, like, I probably get bi-monthly reports in reference to what's
Wonderful.
taking place. I just wanted to say thank you for that piece of it. Mr. Quist,
Thank
we
you
don't
so
get to
much.
see you much in PST, but we do want to say thank you for your leadership, the detailed and commitment that you did in reference to the agency display. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yep. We'll move on to the last presentation of the day, which is Department of Ag. We'll have Andrew Gray, our budget analyst. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll now start with the Maryland Department of Agriculture's, or MDA's, operating budget summary there on page 1. Fiscal 23 budget for MDA increases 1.4 million, or 1.3% to $108.4 million. However, this does not account for an $800,000 fiscal 22 deficiency, supplemental deficiency that's being brought in. So really the change between the 2 years is only $600,000 once you account for that supplemental budget fiscal 22 deficiency. In terms of the fiscal 21 federal stimulus funds, there are two components. There's around $5 million was used out of a $10 million allocation for the Maryland Farmer COVID-19 Relief Program that was funded through the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act in fiscal 2021. And at the bottom of this page, you see the second exception in terms of the funding coming through MDA's budget is the funding that went to the Maryland Agricultural and Resource-Based Industry Development Corporation through the Relief Act of 2021. It's $2 million for a couple of programs that actually will be continuing on in fiscal 23, and we'll talk about that in a second. In terms of the fiscal 22 proposed deficiency that came in with the budget as introduced, there are two main components, or three main components here. The first one was the funding for the Animal Health Laboratory. Increased operating costs reflect around a $70,000 increase in general funds for that program. You also see an increase in funding for gypsy moth spraying. There's been an outbreak on the Eastern Shore. $220,000, $110,000 in general funds, $110,000 in special funds, and matching funding from the counties. And finally, there's around $2.5 million combined funding for black fly and midge spraying in Washington and Baltimore counties. And we'll talk a little bit about the additional funding that's come in the fiscal 22 supplemental budget, that or fiscal 23 supplemental budget deficiency for these programs. It's around $800,000. In terms of the overview of the agency's spending, the Office of Resource Conservation comprises around 50% of the agency's budget, and that's mostly for cover crop funding. It's one of the larger programs, the largest program in MDA, and also for salaries. In terms of the proposed budget, once again, increases by around $600,000 as a result of that deficiency that we talked about. Soil Conservation District positions hired above the base salary accounts for a $122,000 increase, so there are around 53 positions were brought in with Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bay's 2010 Trust Fund money. MDA has done a remarkable job in terms of hiring. They've gotten all 6 of those positions hired for now. And looking in terms of the other personnel expense changes here, you see abolished positions, decreased the position complement by 3, $190,000 decrease in turnover adjustments, also reduced the personnel expenses by $193,000. In terms of some of the larger changes that we're seeing here, the Rural Maryland Prosperity Investment Fund increases by almost $3 million, and the Tree Solutions Now Act increases by about $2.5 million in the fiscal 23 budget. There's also a new Maryland Agricultural Resource-Based Industry Development Corporation programs that's really reflecting the extension of funding that was provided through federal funding. In terms of those large decreases in the budget is around $2.5 million due to the one-time funding for the black fly and midge spraying, and that's actually even more as a result of the supplemental that came in, the fiscal 22 deficiency. And the Next Generation Farmland Acquisition Program is a $2.5 million decrease between the 2 years because that money is actually budgeted in the dedicated purpose account. So once that money comes over, then you would no longer see that decrease. In terms of another large change here, it's $867,000 or so increase for contractual full-time equivalents, and this is largely due to the spotted lanternfly treatment, one of the concerns that Maryland has now. In terms of the changes there, just a little bit more data about the Rural Maryland Prosperity Investment Fund. A lot of applications, a lot of interest. This funding will help out with rural Maryland's needs. Tree Solutions Now Act, it's around $15 million in total, $10 million coming from the Bay Restoration Fund for the Chesapeake Bay Trust, $2.5 million from Virginia NR, and then $2.5 million reflected here for the Maryland Department of Agriculture for tree plantings under the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program and other tree planting programs. And then once again, there's the 2 new Marbidco grant programs, a really extension of funding from the the federal stimulus funding. In terms of the personnel data, we've already discussed 3 positions reduced in the allowances. There's 3 long-term vacant positions. In terms of Maryland Department of Agriculture's vacancies, it has seen an increase in the number of vacancies since last year, but the number of long-term vacancies, which are defining as more than a year, have decreased, and that's due to their interest in really trying to fill those long-term vacancies. In terms of the key observations here, the first one concerns the study and preparation for a Maryland Agriculture Climate Vulnerability Assessment. So last year in the Joint Chairman's Report, there was a request for a report to really look at what's the impact of climate change on Maryland. What's the vulnerability look like? There was a group that was brought together in terms of the Harry R. Hughes Center for Agroecology and other interested parties, including Maryland Department of Agriculture, Maryland Department of the Environment, to look at this, see what would be necessary. The assessment, kind of the outcome from this idea was that what you'd really need is to find out in terms of what do we know currently, this is the research synthesis, what are the gaps in terms of our knowledge, and then do an assessment over 2 years, funding about $500,000, including a coordinator position for benefits, kind of outreach, and then the actual request for proposal and solicitation. Now, there does not appear to be any funding in the fiscal 23 budget, in MDA's budget, or any other budget for this assessment. Therefore, Department of Legislative Services recommends MDA comment on whether there is any funding anywhere for this purpose, and if the funds are not included, whether MDA is able to do this assessment within its existing funding authority. The second issue is the key observation of the cover crop program in terms of looking at what does the cover crop program look like going forward. So the cover crop program is one of the largest single program in MDA's budget, provides for a number of benefits for soil health as well as nutrient and sediment reductions, for Chesapeake Bay restoration, And one of the considerations moving forward is the possibility of kind of really enhancing it and kind of making it into a kind of outcome-based program. So it's not just paying for planting acres, but actually paying for outcomes. So the idea that you would be paid if you actually did see the soil nutrient reductions, and if I guess also hopefully you'd see the soil health benefits as well. One of the concerns though with all of this is that certainly every year we're really dependent upon the weather, and particularly the fall weather, as MDA points out. If fall weather makes it difficult for farmers to get into the fields and to get their crops out, and then also to plant the cover crops, it's a big problem. One of the potential solutions to this is the aerial cover crops, so the idea of planting by aerial seeding. Also contingent upon the weather, I understand. The plains also are impacted by really heavy weather, unfortunately. But from what I understand, you can aerial seed cornfields even before they're harvested, and therefore the seed will be kind of growing up slowly. The corn is harvested, and you already have the cover crops out there. Soybeans, it doesn't work as well, from what I understand. But definitely a concern about rain every year, definitely a kind of consideration too. In terms of looking at that outcome-based program, is there any way to address that kind of concern about rain, and then also just make sure we're kind of getting those benefits year in and year out, not just paying for practices, but actually seeing the outcomes that we want to see? DLS recommends MDA comment on its plans for adopting a cover crop plus program. This is sort of like the idea of a potential 5-year outcome-based program. How the outcome-based program would work given weather variability and agricultural market shifts, how aerial seeding of fields before they are harvested helps to resolve the challenge of fall weather variability, and whether it sees the program transitioning fully to an outcome-based approach in the future. DLS's recommendation on the next page to concur with the governor's allowance. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you. Seeing no questions by the committee at this time, bring up my friend, Secretary Bartenfelder.
Thank you, Senator. It's good to be here and see you in person. And it's good to see the members of the committee again. Andrew did another great presentation. Thank you for your hard work on this. What I'd like to do first is introduce our team that's here. Right here is our Deputy Secretary, Steve Conley. To my left is Jason Kepler, who's subbing in for Hans Schmidt, who's actually on a field operation that's right now in Talbot County. Cassie Shirk is right there. She's, our ledge person, as well as now she's an Assistant Secretary for Marketing and Animal Industries. John Nickerson, who is our Fiscal Officer, is next to her, and somewhere back here, Eric Von Paris, who's our Assistant Secretary for Fiscal Services, and Kevin Conroy, who's the Assistant Secretary for the MIDGE program. And so with that, that's our team who's here. What I'd like to start off with, though, is thank the committee for your past support for that new Salisbury Animal Health Lab, which we are in the process of moving into right now. And we're dealing with an AI event, a high-path avian influenza event right now, which is actually in Delaware, but it's close enough to the Maryland border where our team is on site. So if you'd like any updates on what's going on there, Deputy Secretary Steve Conley has been on site every day, and he was there this morning. He can give you some up-to-date information. Jason Kepler has also been there and did the mapping, because even though it's in Delaware, the quarantine zone for that comes over into Maryland. So that's why we work jointly with Delaware and Virginia when there's events that close to us. We concur with the governor's budget. There's 2 issues that Andrew brought up, and Jason's prepared to talk about them, and we can answer any other questions the committee may have.
Perfect.
You're on.
I'm on? Okay. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much. For the record, Jason Kepler, Program Manager of our Conservation Grants Program. As always, Mr. Gray, excellent analysis of our programs and great questions regarding specifically within resource conservation. To address the first question regarding the climate vulnerability assessment, as was noted, the Harry R. Hughes Center for Agroecology was tasked with developing a report to determine what was needed to perform an actual climate assessment. That report was done in collaboration with both the Department of Agriculture, Department of the Environment, and Department of Natural Resources. That report was submitted a few weeks ago to the legislature, and to specifically answer your question, the administration has not provided the $500,000 in the fiscal '23 budget currently, and if it were needed, the report recommends, or the report recommendation from the Hughes Center requires additional funding for that to take place, so that would be spread over a 2-year period of time. So, sorry for bumbling that, but, so there is no funding currently. Harry R. Hughes Center recommends that $500,000 of additional or new funding for that assessment to be conducted. To answer the second question regarding Cover Crop Plus, Cover Crops, as you mentioned, is a critical component to meeting our conservation goals within our watershed implementation program. This program relies heavily on bay restoration and Chesapeake and Atlantic coastal-based trust funding on an annual basis to the tune of over $22 million. So this covers the cost of reimbursement to farmers for planting of cover crops, which are small grains that are planted following corn or soybeans to absorb excess nutrients that are left over in the soil. We have a variety of different payment options that are available to farmers. You mentioned the aerial seeding option. We do incentivize early planting of cover crops to make sure that those crops are planted as early as possible for the maximum environmental benefit. We have been looking at expanding the traditional cover crop program into a multi-year program, as mentioned, up to 5 years, where we would pay farmers on an annual basis over an extended contract for additional implementation of cover crops, but done in conjunction with other farm management practices such as residue management or no-till operations to help increase soil health and tilth, overall improving economic viability of those farms. So with that, I'll just stop there and open up to any questions that you all may have.
Senator Saling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for this information, and also our legislation. I appreciate the county finally working with us. I have to emphasize that because we knew how much of a problem these midges have been. Working with Merlin Waterways and the county and the water treatment plant, which we know the line and how it's been going through, not just now part of Baltimore County in our area, but now going up to Harford County. And I'm hoping we can continue this, and then maybe a couple of years in this program, we can do a study. And the reason why I say that is because it would be important to see where we are now and where we can be in those years. And then knowing maybe if we have achieved a lot, I think we can say maybe we can, won't have to apply as much as what we do with the black fly. And we know this has been a problem. So I think maybe this would be a conversation we can have and still continue to work with the county and them helping us out. But I appreciate all the effort and the time that's been into this, and I appreciate your openness to looking into this program. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator. We plan on continuing that conversation. In fact, since late last summer, we've had continuing good talks with County Executive Johnny Olszewski.
Yeah.
And we've come up with something that we hope would be a 2-year plan to address that problem.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate the council and the county executive, but we want this to make sure we can get rid of this program, this problem that we do have. But if it has to be ongoing, I think we can continue to work together. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary. Good to see you.
Senator, good to see you.
I'm going to ask 2 questions. You can wrap your answer around both of them, so we don't do one or the other. I glanced at this as Mr. Gray went through that rather quickly. He's a fast talker. I'm a slow talker. So I saw in there is a $100,000 increase for Gypsy Moth program. Now, over the last several years, I haven't seen a whole lot of damage in my neck of the woods from Gypsy Moth. And I think I got the right terminology here. That you say when you have a wet spring, there's a certain fungus that comes out a lot that impacts the growth of Gypsy Moth. I believe it's a fungus. And I think we've had a lot of wet springs here lately, and I think that's maybe helping holding it down. I don't know about other parts of the state. but if there's an increase in there, I'd like to know what, you know, kind of what's going on. And then the other one was, I noticed there's a people increase, and about 6 or so people to be there mainly for the spotted lanternfly, which, if my memory's correct, are mostly, at least when this first came out, were looked at in the Piedmont area of the state. So can you just kind of bring us up to date on those two specific issues?
We can wrap it around both, and I'm sure, Kevin, come on up here. Jason, get out of there.
Senator, as for gypsy moth, yeah, your neck of the woods has actually been pretty quiet. Our team's been up there a lot doing survey work. And you're right, there is a fungus that actually does help try to control the population. Our spraying last year was on the lower shore, and it's going to be on the lower shore again this year. Unfortunately, we just weren't able to control it as we had hoped last year. But with this funding and with the buy-in of the property owners, we actually hope, we're literally waiting right now from our friends from DGS to post our invitation for bid right now, and everything goes to plan and weather's right, we will be doing some aerial spraying late April. And hopefully we'll get there before the tree canopy starts developing so we can really control it. But we've had great partnership with the landowners up in your neck of the woods and with DNR on the properties. So again, western part of the state, we've had great control. As for those positions, those are contractual positions for spotted lanternfly. This year, our friends from USDA are actually allowing us to use some of the funding for us to do our own spraying. The last 3 years, the money has only been allowed to do observation work. The USDA previously they were the ones who were the contracting entity with the companies to go do the spraying work. But now they're allowing us to do some of it.
So this is a rather new, I don't know if it's an insect or whatever it is, came to this state 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, I've been.
I believe this is our, yeah, spotted lanternfly. This is our third or fourth year of us having the program.
So is it expanding considerably?
It has, yes, it has been. It's a great hitchhiker, unfortunately. It's been spreading, the first way it started spreading was along the rail lines. Over half the state now is in quarantine areas, and our program staff have been out there trying to educate about this. But again, it's a great hitchhiker. Cecil County, Hartford County are still the epicenters. But we've seen some growth in the population, I believe, towards Hagerstown. But right now, it's education control. Steve could tell you where Steve lives in Rising Sun, it's a pretty bad infestation.
Are fruit trees the biggest thing they hit initially or not? It had something to do
yeah, it's a lot.
They're also a major nuisance if you have trees near your house, if you have poplars. They emit a thing called honeydew. It's the tree sap, and when it falls on anything, it gets covered with black sooty mold, and it's hard to deal with, just in a kind of a convenience nuisance type thing. And if it's out in the woods, it kills most of the undergrowth underneath the trees because it blocks all the photosynthesis.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Got 2 questions for you and comments, I guess. Mr. Secretary, always great to see you.
Good to see you too, Senator.
So, speak about, and I plan to, I think Ms. Davis will be up shortly as well, but speak about the relationship and resources through our environmental studies programs in our public school systems. So there are some counties, it's probably in every county, I don't know. I'm from the Prince George's County side of things, but I represent 3 counties. And I know when I got elected delegate, I was introduced to a terrific program at Gwynn Park High School, which is one of the largest, the Future Farmers of America program. And I think there are challenges that, as we all know from a resource standpoint, certain extracurricular programs in schools get all the funding, right? Whether, for those who are jocks, think they're jocks, but I think I've seen that program grow and throughout the 2 counties, and I haven't seen it yet on the Charles County side, but these young folks are terrific in their thirst for knowledge about what your agency does and for what our state needs. There are some of these students have won national awards through the Manage program, I believe it's called. There were a couple who went, all expenses paid, internship to Thailand, or I think it was Thailand for water, Nairobi for water, and Thailand for vegetation. So could you speak to any resources that may be out there to help us promote such programs? Again, on the Prince George's County side, I think it's only like 3 schools that are engaged out of 27 high schools in the entire county. But the University of Maryland Eastern Shore recruits a lot of these students to bring them into their environmental sciences. So if you could speak to that, and then briefly the cover crops and what crops are typically used for those.
Well, the FFA program it gives me great pride when I'm able to go to their statewide convention. Because the leadership skills that these young students show at that time of their life gives me great pride that they're products from, our Maryland schools.
Absolutely.
One of the things that could benefit our students across the state would be more resources, and right now we're working on doing an op-ed to our papers here in this state about promoting the ag tag more, because that money that goes to MAFE, Maryland Ag Education Foundation, and Suzanne Richards, who's the executive director of that now, they put that money to good use in their mobile classrooms and how they travel around the state. And I've had the opportunity to be able to go and spend time with them and the students at those things. So that's one thing. And in fact, the other one, in fact, Senator McCray, this school is actually in Baltimore City called Green Street Academy, out in West Hilton. We had the opportunity to go there and take our ag commission there to visit that school. And it's a shame that local news stations don't cover stories like this, because when I went into that school and I was greeted by the students, and they were there, and they said, "Good morning, Mr. Secretary, welcome to our school," with great pride, and took us through and showed us the things that they were doing there for environmental education as well as agriculture and aquaculture. Great story, and that's a story that should be done about some of the accomplishments that's happening in Baltimore. So, just with that being said, that's some of the things that we can do to make good things happen here.
Yeah, it's sort of baffled me over the last 8 years that, Maryland, I think ag is still the #1 business in the state, and I just don't think we promote it much. And I think, I don't know, I've been on this little quest of trying to find out how we gain more resources to help get our young people involved in, they're getting more involved in climate change and those matters, but I don't think they understand much about the intricacies of, what you all do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and every opportunity I had to recognize agriculture is the #1 industry in the state. When I came on as secretary, I did, and at times, people kind of chuckled about it, but then all of a sudden, when the pandemic hit, they realized, hey, agriculture is the #1 industry in the state because it makes everything happen.
Yeah.
So.
And it touches us all, urban and rural. So love to work with you in your office on that and some of the other folks that are out here. And as far as the cover crops go, I know you mentioned the corn, and I know some of us who live on farmland, old farmlands, once those, whatever soil that was left, we're like 22 and a half years on the old farmland that we're on now, the Cross family farm down in Brandywine. And I know that some of the folks on these farm lands with the streams and everything else around them are part of the 100-year flood plans. And so, eventually, there's a reason, I guess, we're in a 100-year floodplain, or some of the areas are. So the cover crops, are they only for corn and some other soybeans and some other, so explain that a little more in depth.
And in different types.
So eligible crops for cover cropping include corn and soybeans and vegetables. Those are the big three, but we do allow for cover crops to be planted on other row crop type production and in Southern Maryland, tobacco production as well. So there are a number of different crops that are eligible with a preceding cover crop. Cover crops themselves normally consist of a cereal grain, which is normally like a rye or barley, wheat, something along those lines. But we do also recognize the benefits of including other crops into that mix as well. Legumes that help fix nitrogen, like winter peas or hairy vetch, are included in mixes, and as well as a radish. It's called a tillage radish, but it actually is a real big radish that drills down and breaks through hard pan too, so it helps break up that soil a little bit and really improve soil health as well. So we encourage the adoption of individual species, the rye, barley, or wheat, but also the mixes as well, depending on the farmer's situation and what works best for them.
All right, cool. I'll follow up on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just going to move to some of the testimony. You had an interest in integrated pest management, so I'll ask two very quick questions and hopefully get very quick responses. How many school boards in the state have enacted IPM policy, and how many school boards have filed that IPM policy with MDA? And if you could just talk about what enforcement and how do you manage the IPM piece of it. And I gave my questions very quick.
Sure. So all school districts? Sure. Senator, all school districts have them. We have them all on file. Our staff periodically go and just, make sure everything on the plan is valid with the school districts. But yeah, we have, if you would like the files, we have copies of them. We just supplied to the, one of the organizations with the Department of Health.
Perfect. I'll follow.
CPAC.
Yep. I will follow up with the agency just in reference to make sure that the folks that have an interest in this get their responses thoroughly reported back. Just want to say thank you all for the work that you do, your leadership for the state of Maryland. And you brought a whole gang of people in here, Secretary Bartenfelder, but just want to say.
We tried to outnumber.
We're just proud. We're going to bring up some of the next folks that are here, so we're not ending the hearing, but we are moving away from the agency part of it. So just thank you, Secretary Bartenfelder. At this time, I'd like to bring up Director Charlotte Davis from the Rural Merlin Council.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. I'm Charlotte Davis, Executive Director of the Rural Maryland Council, here in support of the Governor's appropriation for the Rural Maryland Council for this fiscal year. You have my written statement. Just want to answer Senator Jackson's questions about the resources that are available. So we do administer the Maryland Agricultural Education and Rural Development Assistance Fund. We call it MERDAF for short. It helps to build capacity for nonprofit, rural-serving nonprofits. We do fund the Maryland Agriculture Education Foundation out of that program. They received funding this year to expand their middle school program, but we've also funded them in the past for other projects, including the professional development of the teachers. So I would I'm certainly happy to reach out to them and encourage them to apply to the program for that funding to support the local schools. The Rural Maryland Council does support expanding all ag education to all counties across the state. So we do support that expansion. We also funded the Manners program a couple years ago out of UMES for their recruitment efforts. So we do look for those. We'll be opening, hopefully, with your support, we'll be opening up our portal for proposals at the end of April. So they can certainly reach out to me, and we're happy to sit down and talk to them. And I just wanted to acknowledge that the chair of the Rural Maryland Council, Mr. John Hartline, is here in support of us today. And with that, I'll conclude my testimony and answer any questions, any additional questions.
Thank you, Senator Edwards.
I just want to say that Church Charlotte does a great job representing the rural areas of the state. She goes to about every meeting throughout the state and the rural areas, so she's up to date on what's going on and been very helpful to those parts of the state. And I just want to thank her for all that she does. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And Senator Edwards, you will be proud that she equally contacts the urban jurisdictions as
I
much
do.
as she does with the rural jurisdictions. Seeing no further questions, just want to thank you for your leadership. I think you heard it from Senator Edwards, and just want to make sure that we see it in reference to the entire subcommittee. At this time, I'd also like to bring up Steve McHenry from Marbitco.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Great to be back before you. Again, Steve McHenry, Executive Director of Marbitco. Mr. Gray has covered the two items that are new in our budget this year. The governor has fully funded us for the other items. Two additional items that are actually supplements to Relief Act funding that we had last year. We were very oversubscribed in two programs. One was our livestock processing equipment grant program. Buy local became all the rage last year during the pandemic. Our livestock producers are having a lot of trouble getting slots at our local processing facilities. These are all typically small family-run enterprises, so we're trying to continue to help them ramp up with the increased demand for local meat products in the state. Also, our wood products producers, our forest industry folks, really have had some challenges. Before the pandemic, obviously the Luke Mill in Western Maryland closed, created ripple effects across the state. Pandemic made it worse, and we were very oversubscribed for our what we call our WIPI grant program, the Wood Products Industry Equity Investment Fund program. Governor's included $500,000 for that. We want to continue with that effort for another year, so we appreciate your support of those two additional items in our budget. Be happy to take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And seeing no questions from the committee, just want to say thank you for your leadership. I know that you also stay in reference to Marbitco and making sure that we move in the right direction. Just thank the whole ag team for what you're doing, for the work that we see across the state of Maryland, whether we're on the Western Maryland in the mountains or on the shore with the chickens and on in our central locations. Just thank you for your leadership. And Mr. Gray, I know that he said that you talk very fast, but just thank you for moving us through the agency report and the work that you do with a number of our agencies. Colleagues, this ends the hearing at this moment for PSTE, and look forward to seeing folks at the end of the week. Thanks again.